Hello, and thank you for joining us for this latest installment of the T+1 Industry Issues Forum, which I believe this is the seventh in the series now. And today we're focusing specifically on exceptions handling, another critical area for the industry to focus on in the build up to the 28th of May and beyond, of course. As I think especially with a lot of manual processes still predicted to be in place even after the shortened settlement cycle takes hold. Now, the idea of this T+1 Industry Issues Forum is to answer your specific questions on this monumental transition impacting participants from around the world. And it is truly creeping ever closer. I think less than 7 weeks to go now. Yet so many issues and questions persist, which is really why we're here. I'm John Watkins, Managing Editor of Global Custodian, and I'm pleased to be joined today once again by our partners on this project, Access FinTech, BNP Paribas, Broadridge and Sapphire, along with my co-host today, Barnaby Nelson of the Value Exchange. Now, the way this has worked is that we've been collecting your questions via our website and the Value Exchange through the forum since the start of the year. And what we've done is we've grouped them together under different categories. Now, last time we had FX and funding, which you can view on demand on globalcustodian.com. And this time our panel of experts are going to be answering your questions on exception handling. And Barney, I'm sure you got some data in a moment to share on exactly why we're talking about this today, but it really does appear to be a major concern for participants as we enter this home stretch. And if it isn't already a major concern, you might leave here today thinking it could be, but hopefully knowing how to solve for it. So thank you very much for those questions that you've been logging in advance, and also for the ones you've been sending our way during these webinars. The live questions are certainly making this a lot more interactive. So do keep them coming today during the session. Please make them as specific as you like. They could very well be a problem that someone else is having too. And that's really the whole purpose of this initiative. So hopefully that's a bit of an overview of why we're here. Just thanks again to all our partners on the project. But Barney, over to you now.
Thanks very much, John. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining in on this call. So I think we're actually going to start by asking you guys a question, or two questions to begin with. So with obviously, I think it's 40 days to go. We have a couple of questions for you that we thought would be worthwhile asking as a temperature check. So first is just quite literally, how are you feeling about T+1? And then second of all is in the context of the manual exception handling that we're going to be talking about for the next hour, where do you think that the biggest and the highest volume and highest impact of manual exception handling is going to be on May the 28th, 29th, as we start to move into settlements? So, please do take a second to complete that. And whilst you do, I just want to spend a second, John, to your point about why we're having this conversation at all. I'm not going to share the screen because ultimately I don't want to distract everyone from the panel, from the poll. But if you go back to the research that we've been running with the industry through the last year, I think, we've done a lot of work to basically to optimize our processes. We've done some work to optimize our technology. But when you actually look at the way that we're going to be handling exceptions, one of the things that came through very strongly in our last round of research was that up to about 51% of exception handling is going to be done by phone calls and emails. Now, that runs at different levels in different spaces. So 45% of account opening exceptions are going to be done by phone calls and emails. Settlements a little bit less at about 38%, and 51% of sec lending exceptions are going to be dealt with by phone calls and emails. So, we are fortunate in having a lot of good automated platforms where exception handling can happen in all of those areas automatically. The question is really, to kick off this conversation, is why are we going to be using phone calls and emails quite as much? And I think what is fantastic about this discussion is that we've got a brilliant mixture of custodians, technology providers to be able to, who are really, really close to this. And I think for me, the timing of this conversation anecdotally stands out as being exactly the right moment, because this is the thing we were just talking before we started. This is probably the area where I think we're really coming into the highest pressure moment. So with that, I'm going to just see if how we're doing on the poll, Will, just to see if we've got any quick views in terms of thoughts before we hand over John to opening comments. But basically, reasonable level of confidence. Strong emphasis on the word reasonable. So basically, 45%. But ultimately, lots and lots of concerns around manual handling of settlements. Probably with the second one I'm skimming through being, trade execution and middle office. So it's the trade processing as opposed to the ancillary processes. So thank you for sharing those. And John, over to you to kick us off.
Sure. I was wondering if the first question wasn't single choice, how many people would tick highly confident and terrified at the same time?
That's true.
Yeah, but look, thanks, Barney. Good setting the scene there with those stats, and we've highlighted how important this is. If I look at the 3 stories on our website that have been most read, it's been around FX affirmation rates, and then the ongoing manual approach to exceptions, kind of 28th May and beyond. So I guess we now know why we're here. But to begin with, I thought to set the foundations even more, could we just go around everyone and maybe each of you can explain why and where exception handling is going to be critical in May and beyond? Just a couple of minutes for some opening comments. And Craig, welcome to the forum, your debut today. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, right, I think the audience has got it right. I mean, it's all about top day handling, right? So it's getting the booking right first time. I think learning from previous mistakes and having those analytics to say where have we had exceptions in the past and being able to remove those exceptions, whether that's in the static data, the account setup, or the trade booking process. I think that's the majority. I think it becomes more acute when you've got cross-border sort of activities, when you're not going to be there necessarily when the exceptions become available. So how are you going to cope with that? What sort of STP or automation can you put in place? Whether that be predictive on the fact of if exceptions are generated, are you able to take those exceptions and create rule sets that say, we will accept and we will amend, or we will do different things to those exceptions if there's nobody available to do those things? So I think, in that space, within the security space, you have that sort of example. You've got the FX that compounds that on top of it, and then the funding requirements that come about. So all those things together, I think, are where you want to focus.
Absolutely. Thanks, Craig. And Jan, if I can come to you next, I've certainly read quite a few of your thoughts on T+1 before, but obviously I think joining us for the first time today as well. But some opening thoughts from you too.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Trade exceptions, as we know, create additional costs and risk for financial institutions. On the cost side, you should not only be looking at the unique transaction costs at the depository, but also factor in the resources that are needed to manage your exceptions day after day. It's easy to picture the negative compounding effects exceptions could have on your operations and how it could ultimately hinder your success. One shift that T1 brings about is the reckoning that more than ever, timing is of the essence, right? With the move to T2 to T1, you generally have 24 hours less to handle exceptions. I say generally because this is really only true for US time zones. And there's been data shared that shows that EMEA and APAC locations are in fact shedding their processing time window by significantly more than a full day. And so when I think about one of the key aspects of the SEC ruling, which come into effect with T1, one sizable factor to me for a firm to consider is their geographical coverage. Where are your operations located? Is your current operating model well suited for the requirement to affirm trades by 9 p.m.? These are some of the questions I'll make sure I have answers to before the go live in May.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jan. And Danny, if I come to you next.
Hey, everyone. So I'm obviously fully aligned with what Craig and both Jan were saying, but as we come closer to the deadline in May, our attention should be focused on what is in our control. Not all of your clients and participants are going to be fully prepared. And there's not much that you can do about that. So I think you really need to focus on what's the key drivers in your organization that we've, very much that came from the polling. What prevents matching on day one? Where are my exceptions on day one? We talked about reference data already and the booking issues. So, I would really at a pragmatic stage say we need to make sure that our teams are appropriately structured and organized, and how they can resolve exceptions in the shortest period of time. And back to Jan's point on the geographical model, you need to think about the checkpoints throughout your day and how you prioritize your work. So, for example, you want to prioritize your Asia clients of exceptions you want to follow up with first, then followed by your European clients, and then followed by your North American clients. So I would say, the exceptions are going to be no different to they are today, except you've got a shorter period of time in which to resolve them. So think about your organization and think about how you're going to prioritize that work appropriately to, increase your chances of matching and therefore improving your settlement rates.
Brilliant. Thanks, Danny. Gabino, last but not least, hopefully there's still more to say on the matter.
Yeah, the world's changing. 3 years ago, Sapphire talked about the fact that we thought operations needed to be real time, and the industry said, "Hey, we've got 48 hours to settle trades, not a big deal. Come back to us later," right? And here we are at T+1. The fallacy here is they think there's 24 hours, and you heard Jan and Craig and Danny speak to this. It's actually maybe 5 hours, right? You got a sliver of time. And it's not, Danny had talked about the fact of like how you can structure things what's in your control. But what I want firms to think about here is everyone sounds like they're just going to spend money. And yeah, you're going to need a combination of labor and tech, but they're going to spend money. This drags the performance of the portfolios for the buy side. This doesn't create the same, EBITDA margins for the sell side, okay? That has to do some of this work. The same for the custodians. And as I've spoken about time and time again, it's about real-time collaboration between the buy side, sell side, the outsourced middle office teams that may be participating between them, the buy side's custodian, and the sell side's custodian. Okay, so it's really 5 parties in 5 hours that we kind of need to manage these things. And I think people will adopt technology solutions, but those technology solutions may only work for their firm. Again, to Denny's point of what's in your control. And what we're advocating is, what about market infrastructure to meet your clients or counterparties, so at least you've got shared market infrastructure so you can collaborate, because at 5 p.m. people are running out to go to dinner with their family, drinks with their friends and whatnot, and then you're going to try to catch them to get ahead of a settlement issue, right? So this is, I think, I think now the industry understands real-time collaboration is where we need to be, and how we do it, I think that's going to evolve in the days and weeks after May 28th.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you all for those opening comments. And we're going to get into some of the questions we've had now. We're starting off fairly general, and there may be a bit of repetition here from those opening comments. But first question we had was around the likely pressure areas, specifically where do people need to be watching and resourcing? And Danny, if I come to you, I know you talked about teams being prepared. What do you think about those pressure points and in terms of resourcing?
And well, I think and you're right, it's a follow-up to kind of in a way what I said in my introduction. For me, the key focus points of where you need to think about your resourcing, if we look at our operations, you have kind of client services and kind of what you see as middle office, and then that kind of flows through to operations, and then you're doing looking at the custodian, back to what Gabino talked about the 5 participants which are kind of involved in this process. Really, the focus is shifting as much forward as possible. What can you do collaboratively all at the same time? And I would say very much the focus of resourcing should be that if you not necessarily put net new resources, but if you push where you typically see your resourcing throughout various processes, if you push them further upstream into what's happening on T to resolve them exceptions, what you then have to do the next day should, in theory, by that be much less. Now, of course, your success on T of resolving them is all around the quality of the collaboration tools you're using and so on. If you're, in a technology world, I still have to support fax confirmations, which always makes me smile. When we're kind of working, and you look at different ways that allocations are being provided into some of between the buy side and sell side, how that allocations process is happening. But certainly the focus needs to be on on T and push resources in that direction, because the more you resolve there from an exception basis, the better it's going to be from a settlement processing perspective, for sure.
Yeah, brilliant. Happy to open this up, open to the floor as well for any additional thoughts.
I think it's very similar to what Danny said, right? I think the complexity of the infrastructure, right from the initial, from the end investor, right, which is even before the buy side sometimes, right? It's behind the buy side, right through to the CSD and finality of settlement. There's just so many different aspects of that chain that can all go wrong, and you can create exceptions throughout them all. And then even internally, right, within the firms, you have from the start of receiving the order or sending an order, depending on which side you are, back down to your settlement platform. And even there, you can see breakdowns and opportunities for things to go wrong because systems have to talk to each other, et cetera, or people have to talk to each other, collaborate real time. So I think, when you look at a transaction, when it goes STP, it's great, it's easy. But when you break down and you look for those exceptions, there is just so many different places, and that's where people just need to, again, just consider where those things are and look at the analytics behind it and say, right, where do we have to improve things?
And if I may, sorry, Gavina, go on.
No. So here, the way I would break it down for firms: if you're a buy side firm like a hedge fund with 2 funds, you can put labor and manage it. Okay. And if you're a buy side firm with, tens of funds, maybe hundreds of funds, the challenge for you is really synchronizing the securities trades with the FX trades, because you want to optimize your alpha. Okay. This is where I think the struggle is, because everyone's already anticipated what they need to do for securities, because T+1, that's what the SEC was regulating for the US market, right? But what was kind of forgotten was the FX component and the costs associated with that, as well as the morphing of your operations that's dragging the performance of your portfolio to meet that. So the larger you are as an investment manager, buy-side firm, the more impact that's going to have on you. So those are the buy-side angle. Sell-sides and custodians, the sheer volume, doesn't matter if it's from a hedge fund, an investment manager, or whatnot. And the time zones, as we got India's already at T+1, now US and Canada, right? Mexico said they're going to come on. The UK is already looking at it afterwards. You might as well start transforming your organizations to be a T0 operating. Doesn't mean T0 settlement, T0 operating model, because you've got to meet all these clients who have different needs. And so that's where the resourcing is going to be. And what's happening initially, if you ask my estimation, is labor. Labor is being thrown, and then they're going to try to come up with SOPs to track it, which will be fine, but it's not going to be sustainable in the long run. You're going to get a heartbeat for this. And I think this is again, we're biased at Sapphire, but we think the real-time collaboration, shared market infrastructure is the answer. But for now, in terms of resourcing for people who are watching this, you've got your buy-side component, as described before, between the hedge funds and bigger asset managers, and then you've got the sell sides and custodians that just need to be able to handle this at volume and scale.
If I may, to follow up on that, Jan, from your angle as a custodian, one of the key questions is ultimately, as Craig says, you've got this plethora of things that can be going wrong. If not all errors are kind of created equal, where are you really seeing as the big hotspots, the potential areas that you really need to zone in on? We touched on FX, time zones and stuff. What's your kind of priority list, if you like?
So thanks for the question. There's quite a few, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. So the first thing I'd mention would be functional and operational coverage during the critical hours of the US day. You will want to make sure that your operations and systems have limited, if any, interruption. And so BNP coverage expands well beyond the US. We have international relays to cover all the regions. And we have in mind that the T1 scheduling changes will be specifically challenging for the non-US time zones, right? So our DREL office operating model, which already allows the handling of exceptions earlier in the day, thanks to our EMEA-based team, is giving us ample time to start the day earlier in EMEA time zone. With T1, we're expanding coverage later into the US evening hours, and we want to be as close as possible, if not matching the 9 p.m. affirmation cutoff with the market scheduling change. Functionally, we've worked to design a solution to receive instructions later on trade date as well to meet that recommended cutoff. And we've also worked to Gabino's point on technology to compress the end of day processing. I think this is another key opportunity to benefit from night cycle processing at DTC and have a better control of our cost as a custodian. Another key consideration I would share here is, to me, to go through a comprehensive analysis of your post-trade ecosystem. You cannot look at one system or a team in isolation. Whether you're looking upstream, think AML, sanctions filtering, or downstream the chain, you need to really map out each of the satellites in your processing chain and identify when and how a transaction could be stopped. And the idea is really to speed through each of these stops without compromising your controls, obviously. And this is, I feel, one of the reasons why integrated banking models, such as our execution to custody offer, is such a robust choice for clients. We get your trade to the market faster. We allow you to meet the 9 p.m. affirmation cutoff, and all of that with an STP rate of 99%. One last focus I share with the participants, and I think I've heard that already, is to try to future-proof the platforms, right? T1 is giving everyone an opportunity to take a hard look at the problem that is manual processing. I've heard about faxes. This is still happening, right? So in this area, I feel the investments you're making today, and I'm sure everyone will agree, will pay dividends in the coming months or years. And so at BNP, we've worked diligently to tackle exception management and look for automation wherever that was possible. So a couple of examples: matching discrepancies, notifications in real time, new auto repair capabilities in case of missing static data. On a daily basis, it really makes a difference. Rather than throwing resources, your automation will allow seamless processing of your exceptions. And tomorrow, you're building scalability that you will need to grow your business.
So there you go. So, okay, so that's a perfect custodian's view. So effectively, yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense, and I think a lot of people are doing this, moving to, as you said, remove as many external dependencies as you can, consolidate where possible. I mean, Craig, from a technology perspective, obviously you stand in the middle of many of the intermediaries that are doing this. What's your view in terms of, going back, you framed the problem, lots and lots and lots of issues from the beneficial owner all the way through to the CSD. Where are you seeing people start?
I mean, I think it's about data transparency, right? I mean, I think Jan's right? I mean, you can't just keep throwing resource at this, right? So it's about the ability to have that data as quickly as possible and as real time as possible. And we know that, different aspects of the market, and there's two sides to every trade, right? So you've got your internal side, you have to get that trade down. You've got the other side of the trade that you need to match up in the market and be able to affirm on time and get it out. And you want to be able to see that as soon as the trades are booked on either side, right? And I think that's where we look to provide that transparency and saying, right, even if somebody's not ready to send a transaction down to the market, at least let's make sure that it's been captured correctly, right? Are the economics of the trades right? So have they onboarded the client correctly? Have you even onboarded that client, right? Because you've got a lot of funds that come on. You deal with the asset manager, you don't know who they're going to allocate to before. So I'm sure Gabino's got a lot of views on that. But have they even got those funds ready to trade? Are they able to get that visibility about saying, right, where are we going to have a potential problem? So being able to do that as early up the chain as possible, so right at your booking platform, being able to share that data, have that transparency across so that people can self-service, then you don't even need to collaborate, right? If you've got to that position where you're saying, I can see what the counterparty's got in their books and records, or at least in their booking platform, as to what I've got, then I can repair. Or I can assign that over to you and say, guys, I can see you're about to book that incorrectly. Sort that out. So again, it's going up the chain as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, and then utilizing the data. It's really in that space, right?
Yeah.
So Rick gave me a layup. I need to do the dunk real quick. So because look, we work with Access FinTech. Broadridge also has a suite of services. There's work that we're also doing with TTCC, and BNP is a strategic investor in Sapphire. So like we're all talking about this to create a cohesive ecosystem. One of the things we talked about to our clients all the time is about interoperability. But what Craig just put out there about post-trade allocations, discovering a new account, and this is in post-trade, and did you do the KYC or whatnot? This is where solutions together, like Sapphire with Access FinTech or Broadridge, right? You can actually do the KYC in real time for that new account. Don't hold up the block trade. I'll give you one more example because I think this is super key, and then I promise to shut up for a little bit. Okay, it's where real-time collaboration comes into place. Is you can have a checklist. You've done your trade matching for the economic details. You've done your affirmations, right? You got your confirmations through, right? You sent out your Swift messages. And then, and I know we're talking about US markets, but just take Euroclear and Clearstream, inventory management, where the security, you don't have enough in that place. Now, this is after the affirmation process, which creates an impression on the street that the trade is good to go. And it's already 8 p.m. New York time. And whatnot. Now you have to see about moving different accounts, splitting the accounts, adding an SSI. If you add an SSI, there's a manual callback. Someone has to physically call someone before the sell side can accept it. So unless you create a digital authentication method, unless you have shared infrastructure for real-time collaboration between the 5 parties I talked about, this is where it falls apart. So everyone can say we're doing this checklist. The checklist is only as good as everything going according to plan. And we already know things don't go according to plan. So that's why you need to be able to collaborate in real time and not wait till the 11th hour. But I'll leave it at that.
No, look, and thank you for that, because it's such a great, I mean, obviously I kind of had a feeling you might go down that path, but I thought, I mean, ultimately, you know, it's great, I think, that the account opening and the SSI piece is coming through so consistently, both from you, Craig, and Gabino, because I think it is something that tends to get overlooked. We look at the settlement, but ultimately, Gabino, as you said, the enabling of that settlement from just as the account even exists, and then second of all, as the inventory able to facilitate what we're saying in the settlement is, I mean, they're easily overlooked. And so, you know, one of the key points of this question, I think, is where should we be looking? And I think those are 2 very, very fundamental areas where we do need to be paying more attention. So, Craig, just shifting slightly, how late can we go? So basically, you know, where we're, you know, ultimately one of the questions is basically how late can I still be resolving trade exceptions in Canada and the US? I mean, you know, obviously it depends on where you are in the world, but can you maybe give us a quick view? We've talked about timings.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you've got 2 aspects, right? You've got the first part of the ruling that says you need to get your affirmation done by 9 p.m., right? So you could argue you should have everything done by 9 p.m., right? We know that there's going to be unaffirmed trades, right? So there's unaffirmed trades that are going to fall into the next day. Once they become unaffirmed, they're going to go into the RAD process. Then you've got all the problems with the RAD process, which is not a fun game to be in. But anyway, we can, there's transparency, you can get around that as well. But you can really run up, I mean, ultimately you've got up until the close of the settlement, the settlement window to clear the exceptions. But in reality, most exceptions have to be done with collaboration. So is your counterparty even available at that time, right? So your timelines can be set by, is your counterparty available? Are you available? Have you got people available to actually make those changes? Because sometimes it's, you know, it might be a change in the front end, right? You might actually need your trader. So your middle office guys are saying, hey, I need to change the value of this trade. I can't do that without the trader. The trader's gone home because we're sitting in Hong Kong or wherever we're sitting, right? So it's not a one size fit all.
Yeah.
You need to understand that within your own organization. And I think Jan talked about it earlier as well, and saying, you know, you need to consider that geographical place of where you are and who's available to do those things. So, I mean, technically, you've got up until, you know, the last minute you can get trades put in, you can clear the exception and take it off the RAD, and it can still settle. But practically, there's all sorts of considerations you have to take into account with your own organization. Yeah. And again, you know, that's going to be easier done if you've collaborated easier, you've done it real time, and you've got clear, precise insights into what the problem is. You're not going back and forth all the time, right?
Yeah. No, brilliant. And I think that's such a key point, is ultimately this is basically KYC upscaled a little bit, isn't it? It's basically know your counterparty, and not just in terms of have you got the right data, but actually when are they going to be available? Because, the idea that you can just come and deal with something at the last minute, there's every likelihood that they just won't be on the other end of the phone call or the email to be able to help. Yeah, thank you. Great.
Thanks, all. Just reminders to our audience, do get your questions in via the Q&A tab if you would like. We'll do a bit of a speed round, a couple of questions here. Gabino, we had one question in about how does a firm's exception management change if they move to self-affirmation in the US?
So this is similar to what I had stated before, right? So if you're doing the self-affirmation process, it doesn't necessarily change much. It's just a timing piece, right? When are you going to get that done? Are your counterparties are going to be in place, right, to be able to check on the economic details of those trades? And you got to remember, if you're a buy side that's doing this, if you're using an outsourced middle office to do some of this work, or yourselves, you got to wait for the counterparty to be ready and receptive to match on the same economic details. The timing issues at play, and they're doing this for a ton of other clients. You're not their only client. So, even though you think you can handle it within your time frame, your counterparties that you're trading with may not. You may be on a schedule. So I would actually make sure that you have conversations with your top counterparties to understand how they're processing this, what the timeframes are. Jan spoke to some of this as well, but also with where the custodial accounts are being settled and how they plan on managing this, and trial it through one or two specific accounts, right? That so you have an idea of what the checklist plan that I talked about before, and then it would be good to have a backup of sorts, right, where you can in real time collaborate. And by the way, most firms have a skeleton crew that's going to be on hand to help manage some of these things in the late hours of the U.S. time zone, but as well as the respective APAC and EMEA time zones. And the idea is to draw down on that team once we can figure out like how to actually manage these exception cases moving forward. So I think that's how it's going to play. That's not a surprise to anyone who's been listening to these forums today. But I think if you have not actually walked through that step for maybe one or two different account types with your primary counterparty traders and the custodians that you have those accounts custody with, you're walking into a storm, and you have no idea what you're going to expect on come May 28th. So,
yeah, thanks, Gabino. And a lot of these questions, the themes are around resources and timing. And Craig, I know you just answered a question on the latter, but we had one question come in just saying, what times a day do I need to have coverage in order to handle the different exceptions that will be happening after T+1? So, anything to add to that?
I mean, in an ideal world, you've got the maximum. Whenever the platform, the infrastructure is available, you want to have people available for it, right? It's kind of as, but it also depends on your own platforms, right? How are you getting your information, right? Are you getting how quickly can your own platforms ingest that information and that data in order for you to clear exceptions? If you don't have real time updates on where you are and what's available within the trade exception, there's no point in having anyone there, right? You've got to be able to act and react to the data that comes in. I don't have much more to say to that.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So look, a quick question, well, not a quick question actually at all. Danny, to come back on what happens, you're in your opening comments, you were saying about basically some counterparties, you just got to acknowledge they're just not going to be there. What are we seeing in terms of dragging people to a state of readiness, in terms of people trying to get to a decent state of kind of counterparty readiness? Are you seeing success stories? Are you seeing certain tactics work in terms of bringing people in to the point where they are handling more exceptions on an automated basis?
So to an extent, I've enjoyed the journey of T+1 today, because where organizations are looking at each other saying, what am I doing today which isn't as efficient as it can be, and what can I do to be more efficient? I think is actually is a worthwhile topic to spend time on. What do what do organizations need to do to be more efficient and not have individuals doing manual stuff and doing several follow-ups and chasers and so on. In terms of the client outreach and so on, I've seen a number of organizations be doing that really well, much the same way as we've kind of talked about this today. Ultimately, a trade is the trade has been instigated from someone who wants to invest in something or wants to move from one asset into another. So they've started on the premise that they do want to settle. They do want their cash for their asset, or the other way around. So they want the trade. Everybody wants their trades to be successful. Nobody starts doing a trade going, I want to foul, right? I want that transaction to fail. So you're on the premise of everybody kind of wants this to settle. So where I've seen some really successful outreach is going out to clients with offerings saying, here's, as we mentioned, here's a good collaboration tool. Here's how we can solve things, be more efficient, and we can increase our rates of settlement. But that has required, I see, with the buy side and sell side interacting, actually quite a lot of kind of communication on that. And as it was kind of mentioned, if you're you get some of the large buy-side firms today are already able to do things such as they've been building their own technology to pre-allocate and kind of get ahead of these measures and so on. What I've also seen is changes in behaviours in the sort of compliance areas. So when you look at KYC, and we think of KYC as a process, it's a process which is predicated on what a compliance department says it needs in order to be able to safely transact with organizations and companies. So I think actually bringing together bringing compliance departments closer with operations and look for practical solutions of how to automate things that previously haven't been as frictionless as possible, because people have just been implementing a rule based on what a regulator has deemed and then how a compliance team has interpreted it. But so I would say that kind of bringing compliance and operations together to think about practical ways to resolve some of that friction in KYC enables clients to be onboarded easier, or indeed where to preempt some of the questions you need from your clients to onboard them, get them to them earlier and so on. So I would say where I've seen success is actually bringing compliance into the operation world much more closely to say, you're going to be part of the solution here.
And tell on them with compliance. It's a good way to get it done. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fascinating angle from an op risk perspective. I mean, as you said, you're having to knowingly swallow more op risk if you're basically going to be doing this. So compliance need to have a view. I mean, and Craig, and maybe then Gabino, I mean, do you have a view, in terms of actually how you guys are bringing people to the table on this? Obviously, both of you are able to put good solutions into people's laps, but where are you finding the tactics to really get people engaged, working?
So one of the things we did towards the tail end of last year, and it's been really successful, is we got some of the big banks to actually start implementing a T0 team, right? So they created almost like a SWAT team, right? Covering specific products over specific within the US markets. And that was proven really successful, and there was a little bit of reluctance at first because people were saying, well, on T0 there's still a lot of cancel correcting going on, there's still a lot of change. If we wait till T1, we see we've got less exceptions, and there might have been an element of truth in that. But where it did bring forward is people actually started identifying where some of their weaknesses were in their booking models, and where they were identifying those issues that were maybe done over T1, but they weren't done with the same urgency, if you like, right? Because it was like, we can get it done by T1, we can do it, we'll leave that overnight to the next team to do, and they'll pick it up and see it later. So by bringing that forward, we started seeing a lot more of those actions actually being created and being good to settle, so ready to settle on T0. So they started seeing that benefit, and that built up momentum. So we started off with equities in some houses, and then they said, well, let's bring on fixed income because we've seen success in that. So yeah, that was really successful for us.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Thank you. Gabino.
Yeah, to me, it's like there's the whole question on trades and the economic details of the trades that everyone wants to be able to match, and that's like tried and true. Everyone understands that. I think I got to go into a little bit of a detail here, because the reality is you have all these account IDs, right? You have the FXall short name, you have a MarketWire BIC, you have the Bloomberg ID, you have, BlackRock has ticker IDs, and we know other firms has portfolio IDs and whatnot. And then when I worked at JP Morgan, there's internal IDs. And this is how post-trade is being managed. A plethora of IDs sent through traditionally spreadsheets and faxes and trying to map all this stuff. And part of the challenge is people don't know who's allowed permission to do what. And the work that, and you asked us how we're bringing people together at Sapphire, we've been talking about this operating system for institutional finance for years. But the way we got people to embrace it is by doing the onboarding and pre-trade component. And guess what? That's where all the IDs are assigned. That's where the accounts are actually mapped. And then and Sapphire has been promoting not just onboarding, but the maintenance of those accounts. So if you maintain those accounts, you have real-time reconciliation of client account data going on in the cloud in shared infrastructure between multiple parties. You heard Danny talk about the KYC process. And so if in post-trade you find that account, now you can actually link a PEP event or the KYC to the allocation in real time between multiple parties, the 5 parties I talked about at the beginning, right? And so now what we're doing is taking these parties, and we even say you don't even need the other party on the platform to be able to do this, but now you have full visibility in real time that takes into consideration the mapping of these accounts and who's permission to do what. So you can collaborate in real time to bring that in. And yes, we can do the economic detail matching, but that's already tried and true. It's all the other stuff we discussed about, right? Because if you know who's permission to do what, then you know you can authenticate who's allowed to do SSIs and actually do digital authentication so you don't have to do a SSI callback. So you can do the inventory management scenario that I talked about later, right? And if you keep the infrastructure interoperable, you can plug and play with other solutions like I discussed before. You know, we're doing work with X FinTech. Broadridge has a great suite of offerings. DTCC themselves also, I'll put out there, right? And this is how you create optionality. People have already adopted some solutions, but they can plug and play with the others, and you get to the same place.
Brilliant, thanks. We had a question from the audience, which we can come to now, actually, I think. And this is probably one that you're best to answer. What are some of the collaboration solutions and systems that are available to the buy side that the sell side is using?
For me, or
sorry, have I just got mixed up questions there? I think, haven't I? Sorry. Do you know what? I've gone for the wrong question there. Let me start that again. We had 2 questions. Let's start. The custodian one's definitely coming to you. What are the thoughts on several custodians now looking to offer a hybrid affirmation model? I realized as I was saying that, I didn't sound quite right coming to
you. No problem. So look, there's been a lot of chatter about the affirmation process, which is very US centric. And indeed, there's, for the longest time, the default model from a custodian perspective was to process the affirmation on behalf of the customer. And we're really seeing a shift in that model and in multiple solutions being pushed forward by the custodian community, whether this is hybrid model, you are able as a custodian to affirm on the customer's behalf with their own trade suite ID, or you are leaving the affirmation process to the client himself, right? So I think by and large, the custodian community is and has said that they are able to support these various models that are being introduced with T+1. One important point when we talk about affirmation is specific to the buy-side community is that amended advisors rule 204-2, right? About the record keeping of allocation, affirmation, confirmation records. So quite simply, if you are sitting on the buy side and you are a registered investment advisor, come May 28th, you'll have to provide records, right? On an ongoing basis. So one of the simplest solutions to be in a position to provide those records is to open your own segregated trade suite ID and then leave it to your custodian to perform the affirmation on your behalf, or you could do it yourself and be in a position to monitor actively your affirmation rate. We know DTC published a 90% recommendation affirmation rate on T by 9 p.m. So I think these are good tools that could be used for investment managers sitting on the buy side to get to a good point in terms of affirmation models.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jan. I don't know if anyone else wants to very quickly say anything, but I think in terms of time, I'd quite like to get on to the other questions that are coming in from the audience. So the second one we have, make sure I get this one right, which was the first one I tried to ask. What are some of the collaboration solutions and systems that are available to the buy side that the sell side are using? And Danny, Greg, or Gabino, the first one to jump in, feel free to take this one.
So look, I'll say it for Craig also. I know they got a suite of solutions at Access FinTech. They're working with a number of our clients. I know the folks at DTCC, so CTM, right? You heard about M2I coming out, right? You have Trade Suite that Dan just talked about. But there are other bilateral solutions out there other than DTCC's, although I would say, DTCC is a market industry player, so you get good coverage there. But sometimes the cost and given the operation setups, there are other solutions that can work bilaterally. Then there's stuff that Sapphire is doing as well in the trade exception management space and collecting data from pre-trade account information, putting it to post-trade in the way we talked about, or interoperably working with the other solutions I just talked about earlier on this call. I think people just have to actually, pick up the phone and ask the vendors. It's one of the reasons why you see Broadridge and Access FinTech, and Sapphire on these forums, is just to create awareness. I think the only thing I would always say to everyone looking for these solutions is ask this number one question. Are you interoperable, or you're making me beholden to your solution, right? You need to be interoperable, because otherwise your data then gets trapped. And if something needs to change in your operations, then this is where things get kludgy, right? So long as that is respected and you're not trapped into an ecosystem, then I think the floor is open for people to take a suite of solutions. It doesn't have to necessarily just be one.
Yeah, 100%, right? I mean, the interoperability part of this is fundamental, right? I mean, you talked about CTM and MTI and DTC being the infrastructure leader in that part of the world, which is right. However, there's a hell of a lot of flow that doesn't go through that, right? And a lot of the exceptions happen below that as well. So as trades go through the life cycle, and things change. So being able to have all the tools available and have the platforms speak to each other is absolutely crucial, right? You need to be able to, and it's being seamless, right? It's about the distribution of that workload as well. You want to be able to pass those things on, and because of the time constraints that we have, you really need to be there as quickly as possible and not worrying about is somebody on one platform as opposed to another, etc. Right? You just want to go in one place and it goes and picks up the right place. So yeah, the interoperability, 100%.
Yeah, just a little tidbit, if I could just say, it's a checklist syndrome that people have. You say, "Oh, I did this solution, about this solution, about this solution," but you didn't account for the real-time collaboration part. That's the only thing I want to put out there, because, and that's where the interoperability comes into play. If you have interoperability, you can have real-time collaboration across platforms, and if you have that, then you can account for any scenario. Sorry, Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, well, funny enough, it's kind of following up on that point. We've been spending a huge amount of time, including with both with our existing clients and with Access FinTechs and the likes of your organization, Gabino, kind of going, what APIs does the industry need? How do we stream the information that we've got out, and how do we kind of enable APIs for that data to be shared in a real-time basis, and not only shared from a perspective of publishing data, but also relevant of interactivity with that as well. So if on one of the platforms that we're talking about here that we're able to resolve an exception, how can we flow that exception back down into, say, the core settlement platform that could be a Broadridge platform, for example? There's been a lot of, I would say, healthy collaboration, and I know we've already been working on together as a group, some of us here, of saying, how do we create that bi-directional API flow? In addition to that, we've been seeing on our NIFIX solution a lot of additional interest there, and a growing of that community, because collaboration spaces are only as good as the size of their community. So that community has been growing and bringing together the buy side and sell side from an allocation processing, and I've noticed a noticeable increase in kind of inward interest of that as an alternative solution for doing that allocation processing. Again, getting away from emails and faxes.
Brilliant. Thank you all for taking those audience questions. We've got just a few left to get through in the last 10 minutes. Gabina, if I can come to you on this one, how and where are people updating their client/counterparty documentation to cover exception handling under T+1?
The documentation to set up the management of the accounts, or I'm making sure I understood the question. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I raced through that one again. So so we said, how where are people updating their client/counterparty documentation to cover exception handling under T+1?
Okay, so part of the process right now that I know is if you do the affirmation process, it's good to have documentation to declare where you're going to be doing that automated, either the automatic trade matching, the auto affirmation, right? I think there's been a previous webinar where I talked about this concept of passive or negative affirmations, where, hey, if everything looks right on the trade, no one has to do anything, we pass it through, but you have a documented agreement that tracks this. This allows you to STP the process. And again, this is where I would argue that if you have the mapping of those account IDs, that helps with ensuring data integrity the whole way through. So just having an agreement to say you're doing passive negative affirmations on a digital platform may not be enough if you don't also have the mapping of those accounts done up front, so you can ensure there's a full STP process and nothing falls through the cracks. In terms of the documentation piece, in the past, everyone's got their own repositories, okay? And even that comes along with the same account repositories. And so everyone winds up sending spreadsheets just to do that, let alone spreadsheets and faxes to map trades on the economics. I'm talking about the client level account information for how we manage this. This again is where at least Sapphire has been seeing with our community of clients using our shared infrastructure to ensure all parties know the latest version. We have some large buy sides on the platform who change their legal agreements. Our trading legal agreements are changing in real time. It impacts who's clearing and settling trades and whatnot. So if you don't have that also mapped, that legal process, and Danny talked about this before, where you're bringing legal and compliance together much more closely with the operations. This is where this comes into play, where there's almost like a blur, right? I will just speak to this. Normally, when you manage your accounts, you have your onboarding and maintenance, you've got your KYC, your tax, your legal teams, your credit risk teams. All these actually share the same information pretty much. Okay. If you link these, instead of like what happens on the sell side, and even with some of the security services firms, they replicate this information 5 times internally. If you have it once shared and shared with your external parties, only one-time reconciliation just between those departments, now just multiply that for the post-trade processing that has to happen afterwards.
Yeah, brilliant. No, thank you. And I think what's coming together so clearly is that at the end of the day, exception handling is basically as you said, I think, Craig, and it's a data management exercise, really, isn't it? And this whole thing is all about the patchwork quilt, as you say, Gabina, making sure that we get that patchwork quilt working seamlessly, get it right at the front end, and then ultimately it all works. And with that in mind, and the reason I come back to that analogy is because ultimately a big part of data is using it to predict. And so if we start looking ahead to two things really. One is obviously what can we do to get ahead of T0? What can we do to be predicting things? And then second of all, just making sure that basically that we can actually get ahead of May. Craig, from your perspective first, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of predictive technologies? How do we get ahead of actually just this reactive picking up the phone call and email?
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? It's about the data sharing, right? And having the transparency of that data. And then, once you've got that transparency and you're able to pair that data together and stitch it together, then your AI can come in, right? And we've been doing a lot of work with an AI in this space and being able to take that, and then the AI predicts where the issue is going to be. And then it can take it further, and it can do the workload distribution, right? So you can actually assign that across a network, because it's not just internally, right? Most people think of workload distribution, they think whether it's the front office, middle office, back office, or compliance, or whichever department. But actually, if you're able to assign and assign that ownership based on that AI and the predictability, because you've got the data and quality data, then all of a sudden you're working with what you can control. And somebody mentioned earlier, work with what you've got in your control. What can you affect? So if I can put my resource into that, or even automate it, because I believe the predictability of it is so high that it's the right thing to do, and just automate the correction, then that's the way to go. So as soon as you've got that database and that historical information, that prediction and being able to assign and repair, peer-to-repair, as we call it, right, is so powerful, because you're now taking thousands of exceptions down to hundreds of exceptions that actually you want to deal with, and let the other party deal with their piece. If you've done that assignment, you're in a good place.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I mean, I think that thousands down to hundreds, or even hopefully tens. I mean, Danny, how are you seeing it? Are you seeing a similar thing?
Yeah, I would say we're fortunate in a way, in terms of we've got a huge amount of data, historical data, in order to be able to pour over when you start thinking about AI if you start thinking about predictive AI is based on the analysis of historical data in order to develop patterns, and the more data you have, the more patterns you can create, and therefore improving what Craig was talking about, the chances of, if something's been predicted, what's the level of comfort you've got with what's been predicted to you, so you were able to give them predictability scores and so on. So I would say in readiness for, I say, operational efficiency, not just T+1, we've been working really heavily on fails prediction. What if something has failed previously, why did it fail? What was the problem? What was the solution to that problem? What action was taken upon it? And then created a predictive fails model. The model then we've been using AI technology from is then how, once you've done it once, you can't stop. You've then got to kind of work out, how does it then continually run? Because you want to update your patterns, because things change within our markets, and they might be nuanced, or they might be subtle, the changes, but it's the continuing running and updating of their models. So I've seen that a lot of our attention of our data analysts, and certainly in our engineering teams, has been into how we can produce fails predictions that we're really happy with the results of it. So therefore we can start to share them with our clients, and our clients can then start to get ahead of problems, spot the patterns, based on the patterns, then take action even before they become exceptions. That's the key for us. Don't wait for it. You've sent it out, you've instructed, you've waited for someone to tell you that it's a failure, then you try and solve it. That in itself is one of maybe more cycles. It's getting in front of that. So I'd say there's done a lot of work in there. There's still more to go within that area, but a lot of work we've been doing on predictive fails for sure.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Thank you. And I think for me, what really stands out is that this is a present tense thing. This is not some kind of futuristic idea. This is actually something that you can pick up the phone and actually start using right now, which is a huge thing. So, look, I think just in the interest of time, I'm just going to go quickly around the room in terms of, a quick 30-second view of basically the run up to May, from an exception handling perspective. What do we need to be really, if you pick one thing, there's testing, there's all other kind of things. I mean, Jan, maybe from your angle, key things basically in the run up to May from here on.
One thing, it's a tough one, right? So starting with the obvious, the friction areas, look to reduce them as much as possible. Continue your client education efforts, whether it is to increase market knowledge on concepts such as the affirmation, but also the importance of accurate SSI. I don't think we've mentioned that. Looking at the mismatch patterns, any tracking of fails, where you could go into predictive technology and perhaps limit the incident going forward. Two other things that I would mention: carefully assessing your resiliency plans, right? Plan for outages and make sure that your recovery time is on par with expectation. And finally, look for that transition period. It's expected there will be an increase in fails, there will be an increase in claims. So spend time planning for the conversion weekend and the week leading up to it, and choose to deploy whatever health check tools that will make a difference and set you right from the start.
Magic. Brilliant. Thank you. Going to go in the other direction. So Gabino, your views?
I think Ian covered most of it. What I would say at the end of the day, we go to our standard checklist around, affirmation, confirmation, the settlement process that we have it today. But then you need real-time collaboration, right? Shared infrastructure to be able to reach out to 5 parties: buy side, outsourced middle office, sell sides, the buy side's custodian, sell side custodian, all have to participate in this. And it's not 24 hours to settle trades in the US. It's now at least 5, maybe less. And then with that being said, I think one of the audience questions was really around CLS. We saw that CLS will not be extending its hours. And so what's a surprise here for everyone? You got to look out for yourselves. So unless you have the plan in place, you're going to be left out in the cold. Now, what's happening because of CLS real quick is you're going to do trade batch processing to pre-fund your trades. That drags the performance of the buy side. At Sapphire, we've been hearing that this is something that's not desired. I think there is an option for firms to be able to amalgamate all their trades, or security-based trades, to do one FX, get best execution or transparent pricing, and then help with some of the settlement process activities with real-time collaboration. And Sapphire will have more on that front on our May 1st event. That's my only plug. I'll turn it over to
the
panel. Thanks.
Danny, your views?
We've spoken a lot today about T, trade matching, and solving the solutions on T and pushing things upstream. So I won't say any more about that. But one final area just to ensure that people are thinking about is inventory management. What happens if you've got the stock, but it's in the wrong location? What happens that you have a high propensity to borrow because you really don't want to foul, but then you get the stock back in? How are you returning that efficiently? It's beyond looking, say priority 1 is looking at T and matching. Priority 2, I would say, is examining your inventory management processes and make sure that they're really fit for processes, because that's the second most common area where a trade is likely to foul, is because of an inventory management problem. So number 1 is trade matching, and number 2 is inventory management. So make sure you've got your eyes on that.
Yep, brilliant. Thank you. Craig, the final word.
I mean, everything. I think we've said most of it, right? The only thing I would say is, if teams can actually start putting some resource into doing this today, practice what you think the future operating model is going to be, learn from that, use that data today as opposed to wait and using it real time. I think that takes you on a road to success, because you start learning from real time experience and what different parties are doing, right? Those that are buying into the model and doing the same operating model as you, and those that are not. And would that change over time? So think about it that way.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for those closing comments. Look, not much more to add. We're a bit over time anyway. So just a huge thank you to all our speakers today for your insights. Our next webinar, I think, is going to be May the 8th. And it's probably going to be quite a general, let's get ready to go kind of webinar. So anything FX, affirmation, whatever, even if it's more exceptions handling, get the questions in. We're going to cover it all on that one final webinar. So thanks again to all our speakers, and thank you to the audience for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.